Chapter 20. Master Li had to spend a great deal of time on the fourth and fifth locks. He was working on the sixth when we heard a sound behind us, and a handsome young man came limping up the path. He was pale and weak and shaky, but he managed an elegant wave of a hand. "Hell," he said, "is grossly maligned. I must come here often." I honored him with the 3 obeisances and 9 kowtows. "Buddha, the thing on that divine creature reminded me of the imperial flagpole at the funeral of General Qing," Moonboy said happily. "Better hurry. Any moment now the darling boy will catch his second wind and come looking for an encore." "Moonboy, designing your medal will be one of the great challenges of the millennium," said Master Li. "We'll have to acquire the services of Deng the Debauched, and even Deng will be hard put to do you justice without landing all of us in jail." The lock snapped open, and we hurried through the garden to the 7th and last gate. Fortunately, it had an easy lock. We slipped through just as heavy, crunching footsteps approached, and we reached the palace wall as a huge, hoarse voice cooed, "You who?" I found a likely window, and a moment later we were inside. Down a corridor ahead of us was a huge room where endless rows of clerks scribbled in enormous ledgers, and above the doorway was the inscription, "Tribunal of the 9th Realm of Darkness." We straightened our clothing and brushed off gray leaves and dirt. I raised the state umbrella proudly, and Master Li marched beneath it into the anteroom. Bureaucrats were dashing in and out of a doorway, and I actually got a glimpse of a Yama King, a dark, crowned shape, seated upon a throne, surrounded by clerks and courtiers. In all great bureaucracies, the clerks are too busy and important to look up, so Master Li simply marched past rows of doors until he came to one with the title, "Treasurer of the 9th Realm of Darkness." He shoved the door open, and we walked inside. We marched past more busy clerks to a great desk where a spirit who resembled a shark was clicking like mad on 2 abacuses at once, and the 9 buttons on his gauze cap indicated that we had reached the treasurer himself. Cold shark eyes lifted to Master Li's emblem and state umbrella. "No inspection has been scheduled," he snapped. "Of course not," Master Li said with equal coldness. "One who raids an illegal cricket-fighting parlor does not announce his plans in advance." The treasurer shot to his feet. "You dare to compare this office to a cricket-fighting parlor?" he said furiously. Master Li shrugged. "In such establishments, peculiar things happen to the odds, and it has come to the attention of the Son of Heaven that peculiar things have happened to the odds in this office." "Explain yourself, sir." "The Emperor," Master Li said, "has been informed that the fee which purchased his own release from hell has been unaccountably increased, which makes it virtually impossible for those unfairly imprisoned to be saved." "A lie! A vicious and unfounded slander!" the treasurer yelled. "Emperor Tang purchased his passage for 13 casks of silver and gold, and 13 casks remains the price." "I sincerely hope so. We are here to ensure that the system works smoothly and equitably, and there is but one way of doing so," said Master Li. "The Son of Heaven, you will recall, had no funds with him, but was able to borrow on the credit account of the saintly Sang Liang." The treasurer sat down. A smile was on his face, and malice was in his eyes. "The Emperor indeed did so, but only on the authority of Minister Cui," he said softly. "It so happens that I currently occupy the ministerial position, and do you have my authority to borrow on the account of Sang Liang?" Master Li wrinkled his nose. "Who said anything about using the same account? Since there are 3 of us, we shall require 3 times the amount, and I doubt even Sang Liang's good deeds have deposited that much." "Less than 20 mortals in all history have amassed 39 casks of silver and gold in their credit accounts," the treasurer said with a malicious laugh. "I sincerely hope for your sake that you are in a position to borrow from Su Tsin, the priest of the Temple of Lepers." Nothing so grand, said Master Li, bowing reverently at the name. One hand was behind his back, and the fingers were tightly crossed. We request you to check the credit balance of... Moonboy and I stared at each other. Who could possibly have that much virtue on deposit? A common sing-song girl and prostitute named Grief of Dawn, Master Li said calmly. We smothered yelps of astonishment. The treasurer grabbed ledgers and ran his finger down rows of names and numbers, and when the finger stopped, I thought he had suffered a stroke. You have proof of permission to borrow on this account? He said in a choked whisper. Master Li took the interlocking Phoenix Dragon headband from Moonboy and handed it across the desk. The treasurer's finger moved to the fine print, and his voice took on a weak whine. Well, why didn't you say it was a joint account? Of course, you can borrow the money as much as you like. Sign here, here, and here. Moonboy signed there, and there, and in about as much time as it takes to tell it, I was hauling a cart upon which were piled 39 casks of silver and gold. Master Li and Moonboy sat on a couple of the casks, and the state umbrella rose grandly above them. The treasurer led the way to a side door and clapped a perfumed handkerchief to his nose. "Get out, quickly," he hissed. The door opened. I pulled the cart through, and the treasurer hastily slammed the door shut behind us. We were in the 9th hell, and I hope I may be allowed to pause for a brief tirade. The 9th hell is the delight of theologians and the despair of everyone else. Technically, it houses Wang Su Chang, those who died in accidents, but it is also the destination for suicides, those who died without proper prayers and ceremonies, and all who died before the official date set down in the register of life and death, like the toad and his goo-goo friends. In the 9th hell there are no torments, which is the worst torment of all. Without punishment there can be no repentance, and purification, and rebirth, and the poor lost souls of the 9th hell must serve the sentence of imprisonment for all eternity. Mind you, no crime is involved. Many of the damned are innocent children. After 3 years the damned are allowed to occasionally return to earth in ghost form, which is the reason for the Feast of Hungry Ghosts, and it is theoretically possible for a ghost to be saved by finding someone to take his place. That is why it is so dangerous to linger where a child has drowned or a man has hanged himself. The spirit will try to seize you and drag you down to the 9th hell, and only by doing so can it earn a place in the great wheel of transmigrations. In practical terms, the chances of reaching the wheel are almost non-existent. All 135 lesser hells, and all but one of the major ones, are dedicated to justice. The 9th hell alone is unjust. None but a theologian could love it. How can I forget? A little girl I saw weeping beside the road, damned for all eternity because she slipped and fell into a stream. It is my sincere belief that priests could deal a death blow to atheism by destroying the 9th hell, and the proper petitions should be submitted to heaven at once. The moment we stepped outside, we were assaulted by the stench of unwashed bodies. Venality is rampant in the 9th hell, where the lowest of demons sell food and drink at ruinous prices, and an army of lost souls besieged us, screaming for coins. We would surely have been crushed had not Master Li and Moonboy been able to scoop handfuls of gold and silver from the casks and hurl them into the mob. The poor souls fought for coins like animals, and the weak and the young had no chance at all. Each chest was nicely calculated to get us so far across the long grey plain. Master Li and Moonboy hurled coins until their arms were falling from the sockets, and as the cart grew lighter, I was able to pull it faster. Ahead was the great grey wall of the 10th hell, rising at the top of a hill. I puffed and panted as I hauled the cart up the steep slope. The howling wretches began to dwindle behind us. One determined band kept up, but Moonboy had one last cask, and he tilted it, and a shower of silver fell down the hill. At last we were rid of the mob, and could start worrying about reaching the great wheel. A demon army patrols the walls of the 10th hell. Master Li wasted little time. By ripping the canopy from the state umbrella, he was able to fashion an acceptable ceremonial wreath, and the handle passed for a wand, and Moonboy's jewels produced a pearl that would pass for the sacred one. Moonboy and I were naturally suited to be the disciples of wealth and poverty, and Master Li's venerable wrinkles formed a passport of their own. He started toward the walls, waving blessings right and left, and the cry went up, Ti Tsang Wang Pu Sa, the God of Mercy arrives for his annual inspection. The wall was not difficult. There were many foot and handholds, and Master Li hopped up on my back, and Moonboy grabbed my belt. I was halfway up the side before the soldiers began to wonder why the God of Mercy didn't simply fly over the thing, and the alarm wasn't sounded until I was almost at the top. Arrows flew harmlessly over our heads as I started down the other side, but I almost fell nonetheless. I simply wasn't prepared for my first view of the Great Wheel of Transmigrations. The immensity of it cannot be described. Some phenomenon made the lower spokes move slowly, even while higher ones were lifting with blinding speed. The wheel lifted up and up and up, and it wasn't even halfway visible. It vanished in gray clouds, and I realized that it had to reach the surface of the earth and then keep lifting until it could deposit newborn yaks upon the highest mountains of Tibet. Endless lines of the dead were converging upon a humble cottage, where Lady Meng brewed and served the broth of oblivion. When the dead were herded back into lines, their minds were as empty as the eyes of politicians, and demons tossed the trappings of their next existences over their heads, animal skins, bird feathers, and so on. It took a little while for the soldiers inside the wall to be alerted to our presence, and by that time we were shuffling in a line with sheepskins over our heads. Master Li's nimble fingers had snatched them so quickly the attendant didn't know they were gone, and the soldiers passed us by. We were getting very close to the great wheel. The dead were climbing inside to swinging platforms. "Ox, if we get inside, we'll never be able to get out," Master Li whispered. I nodded, and he prepared to hop on my back, and Moonboy prepared to grab my belt. "Now," I whispered. Master Li hopped, and Moonboy grabbed, and I jumped and caught a spoke. I managed to get to my feet on the outer edge of the rim just as the soldiers spotted us. Demons screamed with rage, and arrows and spears flew, but we were rising with great speed. An arrow missed Moonboy's nose by half an inch, and a spear grazed my arm. And then we were too high for missiles to reach, and a moment later we were shooting up into the clouds. We rose with incredible speed that made tears blur my eyes, and Master Li began to swear quite foully. We had left the demons below, but we would be lost if we couldn't see where to get off, and the clouds obscured everything. Long minutes passed as we whirled into infinity, and still the clouds billowed around us. Then I began to see pinpricks of light like tiny stars, and Master Li scanned the sky. "There, the perfectly round one. See it?" "Yes, sir," I said. "Don't miss." "No, sir," I said. The small round spot of light appeared to be zooming towards us at an unbelievable speed. I crouched, trying to judge the trajectory. "Ready," I said. My heart stopped when a thick cloud blinded me, but then we shot through it. "Set," I said. The light was crossing my imaginary target point, and I jumped with all the strength I had. We shot across the sky like a projectile from a catapult, and the light grew brighter and brighter, and then we plunged straight into the center of it and hit a wall of water. The breath was knocked out of me, and I almost choked to death as I floated upward, and then my head broke through the surface, and I gasped and gulped fresh air. I hauled Master Li and Moonboy to a bank and dragged them up. We were lying on green grass, and a yellow sun was shining, and bright birds were chirping, and a white skull was grinning up at us from the bottom of a pool. Master Li crawled over and tilted his wine flask over the pool, and Moonboy and I watched the wine whirl in a spout that disappeared into the grinning jaws. "Ling, old friend, you are truly a great artist," Master Li said admiringly. The reeds moved. Burp. They moved again. No, but I am not a bad quack. Moonboy was probing sensitive areas that might or might not have come into contact with an oversized demon. I stared at a long bleeding scratch where a spear might or might not have grazed my arm. Master Li grinned at us. "Moonboy, have you forgotten your teacher and the bandit he deafened? Ox, have you forgotten Granny Ho and her son-in-law? If Moonboy hadn't handled that demon, we would have been killed. And if Ox had missed the target just now, we would also have been killed. We have been treated to the artistry of the great Liu Ling, which makes questions of literal truth immaterial, if not absurd. Was Chuang Tzu imagining himself to be the butterfly, or was the butterfly imagining itself to be Chuang Tzu?" He turned back to the pool and poured more wine in, and the old man in the skull drank in comfortable silence, like old friends. "Ling," Master Li finally said, "your priest did a marvelous job of probing our minds while we lay in mushroom stupors, and they were not blinded, as I am, by subjective experience. Is it permissible to ask for an opinion?" The reeds remained still. "Let's put it this way. If you were to entertain somebody with the story of Li Kao and Number 10 Ox and Grief of Dawn and Moonboy and Prince Liao Pao and so on, what would you call it?" The reeds remained quiet, but then, slowly, they moved. "Shi Tao Chi." "The story of the stone," Master Li nodded. "Yes, I vaguely perceive what you mean. It's a question of priorities, of course, and I haven't quite sorted them out, but I'm almost there, I think." He got to his feet. Moonboy and I followed his example, and we bowed to the skull. "Ling," Master Li said, "I still say you're a very great artist." The reeds moved for the last time. "Cow, I still say you were born to be hung." A priest was holding a gate open for us. We walked out to a green hillside, and the last I saw of the Temple of Illusion was a window in a small tower, with shutters half closed. A winking eye.